It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the walls. The chair is against the walls. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.
And welcome everybody to another, I guess we're calling this a Minuteman University podcast, conversation with Jeff Knox. Jeff is the, what do you call it, director, I guess, of the Firearms Coalition. But you're a Second Amendment political activist. Your dad was Neal Knox. We'll talk about him. We're coming up on the NRA annual meetings, the NRAM, and this is a perfect time to talk to Jeff about NRA. We've got a lot of things going on. Recently, the NRA filed a lawsuit against their PR company, and Jeff put out a really nice blog post about that on firearmscoalition.org, and we're going to talk about that. But this is we've got Jeff on. It's a great opportunity, and Jeff, thanks for jumping in. I'll give you a second to say hello. But Jeff, for people that aren't familiar, you've got a lot of insight into this particular situation. We'll get into it going back to 1977, when your dad was responsible for helping the NRA, well, encouraging the membership of the NRA to stand up against the leadership's the NRA's leadership's decision to move to Colorado, or was it New Mexico, but from Washington D.C. And your dad helped stop that through member activism. And then in the 90s, when the NRA was having some issues with the stuff that we're seeing the consequences of now, your dad was instrumental. You're aware of that all. You're here to talk about what he did and what you're doing and your brother's doing. Thank you for your time. I'll let you introduce yourself, Jeff Knox from the Firearms Coalition. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure to be here, Pete. Thanks a lot for the invite. I'm heartbroken about what's going on. I really am. I've been very involved in the NRA for 40 years. I've been a life member for 40 years. I started buying my life membership with my first check out of basic training when I was barely 18. And it's been a long, troubled 40 years. And the news that's been breaking recently is very, very troubling. Right after NRA filed their lawsuit against Ackerman and McQueen, specifying a lot of the exact same problems that Dad was trying to raise the alarm about back in 1996, 97, that was something of vindication for Dad and what he had been trying to do back then. And then that was followed very closely on the heels of that lawsuit was an expose in the New Yorker by a reporter named Mike Speece. And a lot of people want to point at the source, that the source is Mike Speece or the New Yorker. Speece works directly for The Trace, which of course is Bloomberg's outfit. But you've got to look beyond the messenger and look at the facts of the case, because what he was relaying was insider information from NRA whistleblowers. And these are people who are dedicated to the NRA, who were employees of the NRA, and who just couldn't get reaction from the board of directors or from the staff and management, and finally took the drastic step of turning over information to a reporter to say, here's how bad it is. And what that bad is a lot of sweetheart deals, a lot of shady deals, a lot of self-dealing to the tune of tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars over the past 2 decades. being shoveled directly out of NRA coffers and into the pockets of NRA contractors, vendors, and executive staff. So that's a real problem. And that problem gets worse because one of the reasons that those issues were brought up was to make a presentation to the NRA's audit committee to show them what's been going on, to make sure that they understood what's been going on and the threat that that chicanery poses to the organization itself and to them. So we had the staff presented to the audit committee the details of the shady dealings, and the lawyers presented to the audit committee the threats that those details posed, because NRA is incorporated in the state of New York and is under the laws of nonprofits in New York. That means that they're under the supervision and auspices of the Attorney General of New York, and that Attorney General hates us, and she wants to destroy the NRA. Having these irregularities in NRA's finances give her the opportunity to tear the organization down. This was presented to the audit committee. The audit committee swept it under the rug. They didn't tell the rest of the board of directors what had been presented to them. And notes from that audit committee meeting made their way to Mike Speece. And I happen to know the NRA employee who took those notes and made that presentation. And I know that she was a very dedicated, loyal employee of the organization. She was committed to NRA. And for her name to be involved in this just really gives it, in my opinion, incredible credibility, because I know what a good person she is. And I don't know if she's the one who turned over those notes to them or if someone else acquired them and turned them over. But I do know that she no longer works for the NRA, and the scuttlebutt that I've heard was that she was fired. And that's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. So at this point, I just want to say that the NRA board has two choices. They can either rally round Wayne and his pals and go down in unity as the ship sinks, or they can take action, they can throw the miscreants overboard, and they can try and fix the problems and keep the boat from sinking. But the AG from New York is coming, and what they decide to do in the next 2-3 days is going to determine whether or not that AG can get traction to seize the assets of the NRA, disband the board of directors, bring criminal charges against staff and potentially members of the board. This is really serious stuff. This is make or break, do or die right now.
So I'm going to let that sit with people. I should have left a bigger pause there, but give people, because I'm still trying to get my head around this whole thing, the structure of the NRA. There's a board of directors, and we think there's something like 80 board of directors.
76 members of the board.
76 members on the board, and then talking to members of the board, they have committees. So the board are divided up, and a certain amount of board members will be on a committee, and then there's committee members, and those are the committee members that are responsible for the various tasks the NRA does, from training to education to all the different things. And then LaPierre sits in a separate position outside of all that as executive director, who isn't in the board, and he isn't in the committees. He's outside of that structure.
He's hired staff. LaPierre is hired staff. The board is supposed to set policy for the organization, and LaPierre is supposed to execute that policy.
And he's got some sort of a golden parachute, I guess is the term, where he's at a certain salary now, and even if he is let go tomorrow, he's ensured that he's going to retain that salary forever.
We paid him $1.4 million in 2017. I don't know if that's gone up any in 2018, but it was $1.4 million. And So he's making more in 2 weeks than I make in a year. That's problematic because he's not a professional CEO, and this is not the type of an organization that should have that. For him to be being paid $1 million for, and begging hardworking NRA members for $20 to keep the fight going is in my mind atrocious. But they found a clause in his contract that someone put in there that says that when he leaves NRA, he is guaranteed his base salary as a speaker and consultant to the NRA. So he's going to still be getting $1 million plus, according to this contract. And it says that will go down over time and be phased out. But what does that mean? And what are we going to pay whoever replaces him? Whether that happens right now or somewhere down the line. And I have spoken to a number of current members of the board of directors and past members of the board of directors, and all of them were stunned that this clause was in his contract. No one knew it was there. The only way it could have gotten there is through an action of the executive committee and them basically shrouding it in some way when that information was shared out. But the way the board is primarily run, the executive committee is a small group of members of the board of directors, and they are the ones who deal with any necessary day-to-day business in between meetings of the board. And then most of the rest of the board of directors is really treated as a pool of people to serve on committees like black powder shooting and competitions, and the finance committee, the audit committee, legislative policy committee. But the actual functioning of the organization is primarily handled by the executive committee. And they're the ones who run things along with Wayne, the executive. So they're the ones that I hold the most responsible for the current situation.
And they would be the ones who have the responsibility for allowing the audit committee to turn away or to ignore.
Well, the audit committee has direct culpability in that they should have raised alarms when the alarm was raised to them, and they didn't do that. They, in fact, retroactively approved some actions that were supposed to have only happened if they had got approval in advance. So they retroactively went back and tried to cover up and fix some of the problems that were brought to them, but they didn't bring this to the rest of the board. Whether they brought it to the executive committee, I don't know. A number of the members of the audit committee serve on the executive committee. You'll find that any critical committee, that there's still that same group of core directors, primarily members of the executive committee, who serve on these core critical committees like the finance committee and the audit committee.
So even though there's a huge membership and a large group of board of directors and many committees, there's still a small core group, like you're saying, that serve in all the critical roles.
Right. The executive committee are the ones who really have the control of operational stuff.
So we've got a couple of questions coming in. Question that came in from both sides, the gun channel side and the YouTube side. I guess I should mention we're broadcasting this on our largest soapbox, which is the Gun Website's YouTube channel. But of course, we're always going to simulcast things on gunchannels.com, a community we built almost 6 years ago now, a place for people to have conversations like this one. So we have David on the gun channel side asked, how did the pay for executives get so high in the first place?
I honestly don't know. They got rid of Neal Knox was the start of it. In in 1997, Wayne was being paid about $250,000 a year. Within a year or so of them bumping Dad out of the chairs, Wayne's salary doubled to over $400,000 a year. And within a few years of that, 4 or 5 years, he was up to somewhere around $900,000. I raised the issue back, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, and the board reined it back and pulled his salary back to about $600,000. But then the following year, it was back up to $900,000, and it has grown since then. They go out and they look at other organizations and corporations, and this is a big corporation. There's no question. The NRA is a massive corporation, and CEOs of major organizations that are somewhat comparable, executive salaries are pretty high. But in most of those cases, those executives are professional executives. They're professional managers. They're people who have been trained to do that, and managing is what they do. In this case, Wayne was a legislative aide in Washington when Dad hired him back in 1978 to work for ILA. And he just kind of fell into positions as he moved up the chain. As someone above him would get bumped off, Wayne moved up and was a survivor in the process. And I can say with pretty solid confidence that without the NRA, Wayne probably could not make more than a couple of $100,000 a year as a lobbyist. That's his training, his experience. That's where it lands. And this is an organization that is different from other organizations. This depends primarily on the goodwill and generosity of our members. And that's, I don't think that it's appropriate for us to be paying our directors or our executive director at that level. I just don't think it's feasible. And I just realized I don't think my latest column is posted at the Firearms Coalition. If that's the front page of my website, my latest column is not posted there.
Oh, okay, yeah, we've been talking about the column NRA's Dirty Laundry Exposed from the 19th.
Okay, there's a new one that's been posted at Ammo Land, and I guess it hasn't made its way over to my site yet. But the new column, the focus is, the two options that the board has, that they can either throw out right there, the one on the right, that's the latest. They can either throw out the miscreants and try and patch the holes in the boat and start bailing, or they can all go down unified with the ship, because I see no other options, none whatsoever.
I'm going to pause there for a moment just to play host a bit, and we've had a question come up. You talked about AmmoLand. You're an author, so you write, and one of the places you write for is AmmoLand. But your firearmscoalition.org is your website. Your dad started that in 1984. You and my brother Chris run that website now. One of the questions that came up, I think on the YouTube side, was what's the difference between the question was, is this the same as the FPC? And what's the difference? So Firearms Coalition has been around since 1984. FPC is more like 2013 or something, right. 15. So can you tell us what's the difference?
There isn't a lot, except that they're much better at fundraising and have more money to spend. I think that they were originally created with the help of Alan Gottlieb, and then kind of split off. I believe that they've got a .com millionaire that kind of is their patron saint. and helps them work. But I think they've been fairly effective. They've been doing a lot of things that we have sort of tried to do in the past or dabbled in doing in the past, but we're not affiliated in any way. And I wasn't really pleased when they chose their name, but
Firearms.
I didn't get a say in that one.
We're all firearms, so that's where firearms comes from.
Right.
But the coalition part is, I think, the confusing part. And the coalition, like you say, both organizations, from what I understand, originated with the same goal, not to become the new NRA or anything, but instead to unite or to bridge efforts from existing organizations and projects and activists, and to give the place to unite. And like you say, the Firearms Coalition, your dad built that in 1984. Now your dad, I want to talk more about your dad because he's awesome. But he started activism and awareness back in 77, 77. Let's talk about how we communicate today versus 1977. So most of the people listening to this, they might not have even been born then. So at a time when it wasn't even thought of, your dad organized an activism, an awareness, or it's an activism in 1977 with the October revolt of the NRA, when the NRA was, if I understand correctly, debating moving from Washington, D.C. out to either Colorado or New Mexico to a new location, and to basically
they wanted to become the Sierra Club with guns. They wanted to get completely away from anything political. They wanted to just be a shooting group and conservation,
and physically remove themselves from Washington and D.C., where they had been housed, and the East, and moved out to the West so they could become more of a hunting conservation. And your dad was able to, with the tools and the abilities of the time, get the membership aware, united, and from what I understand, they all decided to put on a hat at the same time at the NRA annual meeting, this is the 143rd annual meeting. This is a meeting that's been going on for a long time, big part of our culture. And in 1977, it was held in October, I guess, in Cincinnati, and everybody just put on a hat at noon or something.
Yeah, during the meeting, our guys wore their blaze orange hunter caps and donned those caps and made demands of the leadership, introduced a lot of bylaw changes, actually fired most of the board of directors and most of the staff. And the lawyers stood up and said, well, actually, you can't fire the board of directors. They were elected by the membership at large. And so only the membership at large can unelect them. And but they did fire the executive vice president, and Dad nominated Harlan Carter to take that position. Harlan stepped in and took it, and several months later, Harlan came back to Dad and said, Neal, we're really struggling. I'm not getting along with my executive director of ILA, which was a very new organization, a new wing to the NRA. And so Dad went to Washington to be the interim director of ILA, and ended up staying for 4 years until he and Harlan had a falling out. And Dad was fired and continued trying to do what he did, which was work for gun owners and work for NRA members. And he created the Firearms Coalition, and we have tried to keep people informed ever since.
And that's what I was getting at, is your dad comes from a place of activism and success. And then Harlan wasn't. I've heard people talk about Harlan. He's definitely a player in the Second Amendment, or realm, but he was not a nice guy, from what I'm told. And so your dad was, in a position to do something. He did something, and then there's consequences of that. And in '84, when, again, think about 1984, he started a coalition. So people that were interested in adding their voices to this conversation could do so. So now the FPC comes along in 2015. Once the internet is broadband, people are high speed on their phones, and social media and everything is commonplace. And yeah, they've been able to capitalize on that in a different way. But again, nothing to distract from the success and the accomplishments that you guys did in '84 all the way till today.
A couple of things. Harlan deserves a whole lot of credit for his contributions to the NRA and to gun rights. It was, again, heartbreaking, the fallout between him and Dad, and it got very, very ugly. Harlan was really a hard ass. Just there's no two ways about it. And it's funny because the excuse for booting Dad was that Dad was too intransigent. And what it really boiled down to was when Dad first came to Iowa, he was holding a Democrat majority and a Democrat president's feet to the fire. But then Reagan was elected, and now Dad was holding Republicans' feet to the fire because they had made promises to NRA members, specifically the Firearms Owners Protection Act, which Dad was the primary author of that. He went to Washington with the intention of reforming the Gun Control Act of 1968. And that was his first shot across the bow, was the Firearms Owners Protection Act. Unfortunately, that didn't get passed until 1986, several years after Dad was pushed out of NRA leadership. And it was watered down, and it got the Hughes Amendment attached to it. And the NRA just basically stopped there. They quit pursuing the more aggressive agenda that Dad had laid out for them at that point. Harlan deserves a lot of credit for what he did for the NRA. In 1984, the big issue was cop killer bullets, and the NRA was in their magazines. Remember, there's no internet at this time. The NRA was in their magazines saying that they were fighting and opposing all of these cop killer bullet efforts. But at the same time, they were in negotiation with Biagio up in New York, who was the primary sponsor of the cop killer bullet ban bill. And they came up with language that was any handgun ammunition that was made out of these particular types of metal were considered armor piercing and could be banned from public sale. Dad warned that was really bad, that it was bad language, that it was going to come back and bite us. And that proved to be absolutely true with the green tip debacle that we went through a couple of years ago. It was directly from that. But at that time, while NRA was telling the members...
And the 7.62-39, the ammo ban on armor piercing is all a result of that. So
Absolutely. And so at that time, the impetus for forming the coalition was that NRA was telling the membership one thing while they were doing something different. They were negotiating and working out acceptable language, and at the same time that they were saying that they were fighting this bill. And they were kind of between a rock and a hard spot, because law enforcement is a very important support group for the NRA, and law enforcement was leaning very strongly towards support of this armor-piercing bullet bill. But Dad created the Firearms Coalition to inform members of the truth of what NRA was actually doing at that time. And he did it with newsletters and mailing lists and phone trees, and eventually a computer bulletin board, which was the first gun rights bulletin board on the internet back before the World Wide Web was a thing. I don't know how many people even remember bulletin boards, but that was the beginning. And so we started there. He was also cutting edge. He had a voice line that you could call, and he would do daily updates on his recorded voice line, and people could call in and find out what's going on today. And it was really quite advanced for the time.
That was the Twitter of the 80s.
Of sorts, yeah. And he had it as a 900 number, so you paid like 50 cents to call in and find out what the latest news on the gun rights front was, and he informed you. He did it with a little thing called a Watson board, that was an interesting phone answering relay device that you put in a PC. Back in the days when a 30 megabyte self-booting hard drive was really something.
Awesome. So we started that with the differentiation between FPC and Firearms Coalition.org. Hopefully
Right.
we'll that a little bit. Maybe we'll have you back on sometime just to talk about your dad. And I want to pick your brain because like Harlan. You've met him before.
Yeah, I knew Harlan.
You know Wayne LaPierre, for example. I mean, you know a lot of people out there. But to get to some of the questions, there are people watching live. I want to acknowledge people, say thanks for that. Smeggy was asking on the gun channel side, or on the YouTube side for some reason, is on the gun channel side. What can be done to get the NRA back to fighting harder for our rights? Is that a attainable goal?
I think it is, and I think that this is an opportunity to do it. The Wayne LaPierre as the leader of the NRA, which he actually has been, and he's not supposed to be. He's supposed to be the executive director. He's supposed to be the CEO that executes the commands of the board, and he's been driving the board. And Wayne is a political wonk. He thinks political. He thinks political strategy. He thinks political pragmatism. And so his first rattle out of any box is always, what's the best political option that we have at this point? And that's a problem, because if you're starting from political pragmatism, then you lose all of the principle that should be your starting point. And that's been a huge problem. NRA needs to be always coming from a position of principle and moving, possibly conceding to political pragmatism, but you don't start there. You fall back to that pragmatic position. You start from principle and you push principle, and you have to be moving on the offensive at all times. And we've just simply not been doing that. After 86, we went right back into reactive, defensive approach, and we've not had the success that we needed since then. And while we have had some successes, it hasn't been what I think was possible, because we've left so much on the table, because we started from here when we should have started here, and maybe ended up backing down a little bit to get part of what we wanted. But when you start low, you've got no room. All you're going to do is fall back when it comes to politics. It's just like negotiating a price on a car. You don't throw out and say, hey, I think this car is probably worth $10,000, but I'll let you have it for $7,500. You've just undercut yourself. The guy came in with $12,000 in his pocket and was ready to pay it, and you've just undercut your position. And NRA has a long history of doing that over the last 25 years or so.
No, I don't think that's. That's solid perspective on it. From hearing that, though, it doesn't sound like we can expect superheroes with Second Amendment capes to take positions in the NRA and do our job for us. It's going to require the membership to to require that and to voice their opinions, correct?
It always relies on the membership, but leadership matters. And if the members of the board of directors have the cojones to do what needs to be done right now, we have a much better chance of having our philosophical position within the NRA be stronger, and that's really critical.
To keep our core together instead of having to reclaim from a bunch of shattered, separate pieces.
Right. Maintain the core and harden. We've had a bunch of good old boys on this 76-member board of directors for an awful long time, and they're not taking aggressive action, they're not taking aggressive stances, and they're not demanding the standards from the staff. They've allowed Wayne to be the leader of the NRA, and Wayne is not that firmly founded Second Amendment purist that should be leading the NRA. Whoever is setting the tone for the NRA has to be a Second Amendment purist first. They have to be dedicated to the proposition that every human being has an inalienable right to defend themselves and to have the tools they deem necessary for that defense. And we don't have that and haven't had that in a very long time.
I'm going to ask a question here that might be sensitive. David on the Gun Channel site is asking, you might not want to ask this one. So are you coming from an impartial view or mindset, seeing how they did your father so badly?
Oh, absolutely not. I have biases. I have axes that I would love to grind. But when it comes down to the bottom line, I'm not making a bunch of money off of this. I'm not.
Wait a minute, you don't have a T-shirt that has some snarky NRA reference on it?
No, I don't. And actually, I've written probably 5 or 6 articles about. I try and stay away from the NRA as much as I can, but when they do stupid stuff like the bump stock ban and the red flag laws, I have to call them out for it. And I've written 5 or 6 articles over the past several months that address directly the NRA, the problems in the NRA, issues that I thought the NRA needed to fix. And every time I was accused of trying to do it just to bolster my organization and to get money. And during all of that time, there wasn't a donate button anywhere on my website. We finally put a donate button on our website just a few days ago. This has not been, this has not been our objective. It's not our motivation. I am being as fair and balanced and unbiased as I humanly can, but I can't claim to be unbiased because I have a long history with this group and these people. And so I have no doubt that there is some personal bias in there, and everyone should take anything I say with something of a grain of salt. Go dig into it, find out about it, because I would love to be wrong on some of this stuff. I would love to be, but I don't see that I am. What I see is corruption and self-serving and misappropriation of NRA members' funds, and I see it as an absolutely huge problem. But absolutely, do not trust me. Trust me far enough to follow the leads and I'm following to a large degree leads from Mike Speece, who works for Mike Bloomberg. So, that was where I got a lot of the stuff I started with. But since then, I've spoken with a number of NRA directors, current and past. I've spoken with a number of NRA employees, current and past. And what I'm finding is that that article in the New Yorker was spot on, that the accusations that were made in that article appear to be absolutely correct. And people who I know to be dedicated, committed NRA members and employees are among the whistleblowers and are among the people who were raising the red flags and saying we have a problem here. So I completely, I'm very good with you being suspicious of me, but I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can, and I'm worried about an organization that I've committed 40 years to.
Well, that's an honest answer, but again, is give as much caution as you give people to, or challenges you give people to research your stuff. You've obviously got a massive reference or archive of articles you've written, your brother's written, your dad's written. So your positions are clear, and your history and knowledge of the players in this field gives you some insight. That appreciate your honest answer there.
Well, and I think that I've earned some credibility over the years by being straight up front and as upfront about it as I possibly can. So, that's it. But I'm not getting rich off of this. Wayne makes more in 2 weeks than I make in a year. So there you go.
There's definitely some stuff to play with there. We want to encourage everyone to realize our money is our one of our weapons as capitalists, and who do we want fighting for us, right? So I got a couple of questions. I'm not sure which order to put them in. They don't really fit. So I'm going to bring up something that's come up on both sides, and I had it in my notes here from before, and you've got some insight. The NRA makes a bunch of money each year. Is that, if you looked at that as a pie graph, is that majority from membership dues, or is that majority from industry? Typically, the antis are going to suggest that the NRA is completely funded by the industry, and that industry decides everything the NRA does. But
no, absolutely not. The NRA is funded primarily, overwhelmingly, by the membership, by dues and small donations from the members, and I mean small donations under $200, and that's it. The industry tends to support more of the NRA Foundation, which is the 501c3 division, completely separate funds. You get a lot more industry support over on that side, but we, the NRA, derive some revenue from advertising and a little bit from direct contributions, but no, absolutely not. The lion's share, I would say probably 80% of NRA funding comes directly from the members.
So a decision to to stay a member or to keep your membership is something that people should consider as a valid, tool.
Yeah, it's significant. I personally, I encourage people to, if they're able, go ahead and do the term life membership. Pay $25 a quarter for a couple of years. That's how I did it when I was 18. Pay that $25 every quarter or so, and become a life member. And that way you have the right to vote, and you don't have to give them any more money until they are doing what you want them to do.
That's advice. Then. So your advice is not to withhold money from the NRA, or to not be a member.
At this moment, I don't see how anybody in good conscience could give money to the NRA, whether it's renewing a membership or whatever. If you've got 5 years of consecutive membership, please don't end your membership. because you're eligible to vote. If you've only been a member for a year, don't renew until it gets better.
Gotcha. That's better advice. So that clarifies it a lot. So in other words, you're not suggesting, well, you're playing it smart. If you've got position in the NRA to vote, retain your membership.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, great advice.
And don't send them anything extra. When they call and they write, tell them, no, I'm not going to give you guys any money while this kind of thing is going on.
And that's important too, to let them know why you're withholding funds. Right.
Absolutely. And, they put me on the do not solicit list a number of years ago. But I had a mail tray that I would put letters from the NRA, Dunning letters from the NRA in, and I filled up an entire mail tray in about 6 months, back when I was still, receiving those. And this is another thing, that the vendors get paid for every letter they mail out. They get paid for a piece of every dollar that comes back. The phone guys, my understanding is that the telephone bank company keeps all of the money that they raise, that's part of their agreement, that they call and ask you to donate $20. It doesn't go to the NRA, it goes to the phone bank company, and they send your name to the NRA and say, hey, this guy donated $20, so he's a likely for you to pursue further. So they consider it kind of a lost leader. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. We paid that organization some $5 million in 2017. And I don't know if that includes the money that they were getting directly from members that they were soliciting. It's the most bizarre thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah, I mean, that's a strategy for selling a new flavored Triscuit or something, for trying to educate and
yeah. And if you've ever gotten one of those calls, hello, I'm calling from the NRA, I want you to renew. Well, what about this? I don't really know. Do you think that we could find a couple of hundred good old boys who are dedicated to the NRA who would sit on their jitterbug phone making calls and talking to other good old boys around the country if that was really what we wanted to do? I think it would be much more effective, and they wouldn't charge us a dime. Come on.
Seriously. Get a bunch of retired or just people with some free time and create come on.
And that's something that I do in my other life. I'm a campaign consultant and help get good guys elected to office, primarily here in Arizona. And we have systems that we use where I can give my volunteers an app that they download on their phone, and it will shield their phone number and put my phone number up there, and it will automatically make calls for them. They say, give me a call. It'll dial, and the first person who answers is there. And we could totally do that with volunteers for the NRA. I don't know why we don't. It seems to make sense to me, but instead we're paying millions of dollars for someone else to do it. It's crazy. It really is crazy, but they're buddies of Wayne's, so they're worth it. And I put this kind of in the category of the guy who works at Lowe's for a long time, and every now and then he picks up some tool and puts it in his lunch bag and takes it home because, heck, he's dedicated a lot of time and energy and he deserves it. Well, it's still stealing. It's still stealing. Even if the manager says, no, that's okay, they just keep that, that's still stealing. And that's what's been going on at the NRA. I think that all of these people probably consider themselves dedicated, committed NRA members, dedicated to the cause, but they just feel like they deserve what they're getting, and what they're taking, and they're wrong. That's not the way it works.
There's a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to ask one last one, and then we can start to wrap up here. You've got things to do. And I appreciate you taking an hour with us today. A question that's come in a couple of times from both sides. I'll ask the one from David on the gun channel side. I think I know the answer, but it'd be interesting to hear your take on it. Is there any chance the NRA and the Gun Owners of America, Second Amendment Foundation, and others could ever work together on projects for more of a united force?
Absolutely. And back in the day, and even after Dad, it was really funny. After Dad was out of the NRA, out of the chairs of the NRA, no longer on the board of directors of the NRA, he was still doing it. That his, sorry, I've got a thing going on that I don't know how to shut off. There we go. Anyway, his dad would talk with the guys over at GOA, and they would strategize together. They didn't make it public, but it was kind of the good cop, bad cop approach, that GOA would come in hard and Dad would come in soft. And it was either you deal with me or you deal with those guys. And they worked very well together. And even after Dad was off the board of directors, he would have guys from NRA calling him and asking him, how do we approach this? And he would be acting as an intermediary between NRA and GOA, giving advice to both of them on how to approach a particular issue. And it makes total sense. It's a great approach. One of the things, a clarification that I think a lot of people don't really get, is SAF is a 501c3. As a 501c3, they cannot engage in politics. They can't engage in lobbying. They can't engage in electoral politics. They can only engage in education and litigation. And their strong suit and what they have done very well at is litigation. And even there, they worked with NRA on a number of lawsuits that SAF would file the lawsuit. NRA would say, hey, can we get in on that? And they would say, sure. And then after it was over, NRA would try and take all of the credit and give no credit to Second Amendment Foundation. It created a rift that shouldn't have ever been created. But we each have our areas of expertise and our areas of strength. Second Amendment Foundation does yeoman's work on the litigation front. NRA has been the leader in legislation, and GOA has been the strong, no compromise wing, and they should have been operating better. They used to operate better together back in the day, and they're not right now, and that's a shame. But yeah, so it's possible. It should be happening. It hasn't been.
And with ideally a new leadership or something, that's obviously a different situation, right?
Quite a possibility, absolutely. If
I got to play host for just a second. My phone's about to die. So we're going to say goodbye to the Instagram side. And thanks to the people that joined us over there. Looks like we had 65 people watching over on the Instagram side. So now I can move my screen a little bit and see a little easier. One question I wanted to ask, you brought it up earlier, is to kind of talk about the structure of the NRA a little bit. You mentioned the foundation. We know that there's the NRA ILA, that there's the education and things. How does, we talked about how there's the board and the committees, but how does the NRA structure it, or how is the NRA structured as far as its like major components? And you kind of mentioned how they get funded, or we asked about where the funding comes from.
Well, it kind of breaks down this way. The NRA Foundation is a separate related entity. They are a 501c3 like Second Amendment Foundation is. They're an education organization. They're funded and set up endowments, and have, so far as I've been able to tell, been very clean and clear about their mission and what they do. They are the recipients of the money from the Friends of NRA banquets. and they use that money to support worthy programs, buying 22 rifles for Boy Scout camps and improving handicap access to a range or things like that.
Like the blueprints for like when you go to ranges and they all look the same, that's because the NRA is involved with creating like an established blueprint, and ranges use that.
Sometimes, yeah. And half of the money that's raised at the Friends banquets stays in the state where it was raised. Raises the question of where does the other half go? It goes to the NRA Foundation. I've not heard of any shenanigans coming out of the foundation, but there are some dicey people involved, and it needs to be looked at. So it's a separate entity, as is the Civil Rights Defense Fund is a separate entity. They both have their own boards, which are predominantly made up of members of the NRA board. But then you have NRA itself. ILA is a directorate within the NRA. So it's a division of NRA Incorporated, as is General Operations. Within the NRA, there are two major branches. There's ILA and General Operations. ILA is everything legislative. It's all directly under Chris Cox. I honestly, I think that Chris might be able to do better if he wasn't under Wayne, but I don't know, and it'll have to be looked at. In General Operations, that's everything.
For just a second, where does ILA then? Is their funding all from one source?
That's Institute for Legislative Action. Their funding primarily comes from direct donations.
So when people say, I want to solicit a donation from you for NRA ILA specifically, right, and then people donate specifically to that task, but those are all like keyhole or earmarked and they go straight to that.
It's supposed to.
Okay.
And they have gotten into some trouble about saying that they're raising money for one thing and it going somewhere else. And that's mostly been involving the NRA PAC, their political action committee. That again is a separate entity and is supposed to be completely, arm's length financial wise. And there are some problems with the PAC that, again, I work as a campaign consultant. If I have a candidate that is running in District 9 and I'm actively working on that candidate's campaign and I'm buying advertising for that candidate, if the Board of Realtors comes to me and says, we want to do an independent expenditure against this Democrat over in District 9, I can't take that business. Someone in my company might be able to, but we would have to put a wall up between us, because if I'm handling the Republican candidate and they're doing an independent expenditure against the Democrat candidate, I can't be the guy who is buying the Republicans' advertising and buying the anti-Democrats' advertising. That's a conflict that is against the law, and that has shown up in some of NRA's buys, that the same guy's name is on the check and on the NAB form, buying the advertising for both the NRA and the candidate, and that's a real problem, and that's being looked into, and that's something that should never have ever happened. They know that they're under scrutiny. It should never have happened. But so then within NRA itself, ILA is pretty much self-funded. I believe they get some general funds from NRA, but mostly they do their own fundraising. And I haven't seen any clear signs of chicanery coming out of ILA. So it's possible that ILA is insulated enough that they could be pushed aside, set aside, looked at closely, given a clean bill of health, and allowed to go on and keep operating. General Operations has training, competitions, education, that kind of stuff. And general operations, there are some challenges, but it's mostly in fundraising, PR, and political spending is where the issues really lie. And if we can segregate those problems and the people who are responsible for those questionable practices out of the rest of NRA, possibly we can save the organization. But I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's the only choice we have to try and save the organization.
Well, and that was going to be, I guess, the wrap-up question, but I guess I hadn't read your newest article over on Ammo Land, soon to be up on firearmscoalition.org, about the two options.
Yeah.
And, well, again, this is something that we've only had. This article came out, recently. The show's coming up here, so circumstances and timing and everything. But I know we're hitting the time here for the top of the hour. I know we've left questions unanswered, but you've definitely uncovered a lot. You've given us some insight. I find very valuable just in that last point there.
Well, let me throw something out, Pete. Sure. The NRA meeting of members is going to be on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock in Indianapolis. Any of your listeners who can be at that meeting should be at that meeting. They need to let their frustration be heard. They need to demand that it be heard. The powers that be are probably, almost definitely, going to try and shut down anything on the floor of the meeting. And, they'll point at the TV cameras and whatnot. And my answer to that is, well, throw those guys out. Everybody who's not a member of the NRA needs to leave the room. Because we need to talk about this. They need to set a time certain to discuss the accusations. They need to let the members have a voice, and the members need to be in that room and not be willing to be shut down. They don't have the power that they had back in '77 at Cincinnati. After that, the powers that be closed those doors to stop anybody from being able to do that again. First, it was my side trying to stop any counter-revolution, and then it was the other side as they gained more control. But at this point, almost all of the reforms of Cincinnati have gone away, and the doors have been closed. At the members' meeting, there is virtually nothing that you can do except file resolutions and express your anger. They want the members' meetings to be just rah-rah sessions, and they want to drag them out with long speeches and then say, gosh, we're all tired, and there's a whole bunch of guns over in the exhibit hall, and let's all get over there and see them, so I move we adjourn. And guys need to stand firm and say, no, no, no. We want to talk about this. We want answers. Are you resigning? Are you going away? Is the board doing what the board needs to be doing to clean up this mess? And the members, I'm afraid I'm not going to be there in Indianapolis. I quite frankly, I can't afford the trip.
We can change that, though, right? You've got the firearmscoalition.org. You mentioned earlier that begrudgingly you put up a donate button. I wish you'd change the text on that from donate to support, because really, who do we want in NRA this year? Do we want a bunch of people, endless people telling us about the next magazine option or a new color option? I mean, that stuff is awesome. The industry is great, but you can send Jeff a cup of coffee, drop the $5 here into the PayPal link. I'm assuming that's a PayPal link.
Yep.
And I would assume if a couple of thousand people dropped a cup of coffee at Jeff, he'd be at NRA. I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire, but I just want to let people know that's an opportunity. If you're pissed and you're thankful for the opportunity for the information that Jeff's given you, we encourage you to go to firearmscoalition.org, scroll down a little bit on the left. There'll be a donate button. If 1,000 people dropped a pancake breakfast on him, if you telling me you wouldn't want to take Jeff out to eat pancakes? He'd be at NRA.
I appreciate it, and I didn't put it up begrudgingly. We've usually had one on there, and we rebuilt the site, and for some reason never were able to get it back up and working. But that didn't stop us from doing our job, and that's what it's all about.
But I think I interrupted you there when you said not getting to NRA, but you were in the midst of a point there about if you were able to get to NRA.
If I was able to get there, I would be trying to make things happen on the floor. And I've been to a lot of NRA meetings. I know how they run. And if I'm not there, I will probably be on the phone with someone who is there and offering my guidance and support, because I know that there are going to be people there who are angry and frustrated. I was contacted by a former employee of NRA who said, these articles are spot on. You're absolutely right. And I know it firsthand, and I want to be at the meeting, and I want to try and do something, and what can I do? And so I gave him some advice on how to do that. Adam Kraut has been in contact with me, and I've talked with him about possibilities and my advice to him as someone who's been trying to get on the board and hasn't been able to make the cut. Something that people should know too is that if you get America's First Freedom, if you watch NRA TV, neither of those products belong to the NRA. Those people who put those out, everybody from Cam Edwards to Dana Lesh, are not NRA employees. They are Ackerman McQueen employees. They're paid by Ackerman and McQueen. Ackerman and McQueen owns NRA TV, owns the First Freedom magazine. We're going to take a hit no matter what we do, but it looks like the divorce with Ackerman and McQueen is moving forward, I hope, and now we need to do some more divorcing. It's all going to hurt, but it's going to hurt worse if we don't. So do it for the children, and let's make it better. Let's make it work.
Yeah, growth requires a little bit of pain once in a while. You have to.
Absolutely.
So appreciate the time. We talked a little bit off air before we started that you'd be willing to join in a conversation with more people. So I don't think we'll have time before NRA, but perhaps after NRA, we could do an after action. Like you said, you'll be in contact with people that are there. You'll have more insight as to what happened. We'll know more about whatever action might be going on in New York. I think I hate to gloss over that. Again, do you think this was strategic, this article? Was there any awareness of putting this article out with the timing with the NRA annual meeting?
Absolutely. Okay. I think that Mike Spice has been, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but I think that I know he's been working on this for a long time. He's called me several times trying to get me to, provide him with some sort of information, and I didn't have it and didn't know if I would give it to him anyway. But I believe that he was trying to get some other corroboration to help, and I think that he felt like between the lawsuit and the NRA meetings coming up that it was time to drop the bomb, and quite a bomb it really is. It's astounding as far as I'm concerned, and really it's heartbreaking. It really is. I've dedicated a lot to this organization over the years, and this is not a good situation.
And it's frustrating. We all have interest and we all want to do. So it's frustrating. So I appreciate your time and giving us this insight. What's the best way for people to contact you, support you? I mean, I mentioned the firearmscoalition.org, but are there other ways that people can follow or?
I'm out there on Facebook. The coalition is out there on Facebook. I think that I've got a Twitter account that's connected to my Facebook account. But AmmoLand, follow. I see that you put up the link for my author page on AmmoLand. That's where it'll always be published first. We give them right of first production. I'm also on in Firearms News. Most editions of Firearms News magazine when it comes out, although those are frequently versions of articles that have appeared either on my website or at AmmoLand. So, and one of the things is that all of those articles are free for anyone to republish, repost. We do prefer that they give us a link back to either my website or AmmoLand. But if you've got a newsletter or a blog and you want to cite something, you're more than welcome to do it, either in total or just a link. But we put it out there for you. We put it out there for education. Information and education is the first priority. Making a dollar off of it is way down the list. Although my wife would probably argue about that, but that's the priority, is getting the information out and sharing it around. I was just turned down by Facebook to boost my last 2 columns. The one, they said that it was political and that I needed to get political clearance, and the other one they said, what was it that they said? Something else, some other excuse for that they couldn't boost it. I've got thousands of followers. Used to get 100,000 hits on an article that I would post on Facebook. Now I get 2,000 or 3,000. So it's things have definitely changed, and it's an uphill slog.
Always, and people that might be interested in supporting the fight, shares, likes, subscriptions.
Subscriptions to my newsletter. I have a newsletter that I put out. If you contribute to the coalition in any way, we will send you the hard copy newsletter, our hardcore report, which is my main fundraiser. That's my main source of funds, and I am way behind. Had one almost ready to go out the door when all of this started breaking, and that's put me back another week, because I can't in good conscience put out the newsletter and say, well, we'll see what happens at the NRA convention this weekend. So that's on hold for the moment, but that's our primary fundraiser, is subscriptions to the newsletter. So honestly, I don't know if there's a link on the website at this moment or not. If you contribute $5, you'll be subscribed to the newsletter. How's that?
Right on. Now, I'm also going to mention the book. Your dad was a prolific writer. You guys put a bunch of his stuff together into the gun rights war. Definitely must read. We'll put a link in the description, and you can get it on Amazon, or better yet, buy it at your local bookstore, your local gun shop.
You bet. Buy it at your local gun shop if they carry it, or you can get it directly from us or on Amazon. Gun shop, us, then Amazon. That's our preference. But it's a great bathroom book. It's a lot of short articles with some background put around them, so easy reading. You can go to specific historical events and find out what really happened there, because it was written by my father while it was happening, and he was always involved.
And it's neat to put some of the history together. I find it super fascinating to kind of assemble the history.
Right.
Of our Second Amendment fight. It's not always been consistent. Well, it's been consistent, but it hasn't always been with the same focus and weavers that we have to defend and unfortunately not fight enough.
And something that's really important is that attitudes change over time, and Dad's attitude and the perceptions of gun owners and rights defenders back in the 60s were completely different from the perceptions that we have today, and you have to take that into account. It's like looking at people who did something kind of sketchy racist back in 1965 is a lot different than them doing that same thing today. So getting that perspective, that's one of the important things that you can find in the book.
Jeff, thanks again for joining us. We'll chat again after the show. Thanks for being there, and thanks for offering your insight. Thanks, everybody, for joining us live. Thanks to our Patreons who make it possible for me to take the time to produce these things.
Thank you, Pete.
Oh, you bet. And like I say, we'll chat a bit here as soon as I find our friend Charles Heller to wrap up the show here.
Good old Charles.
Gunwebsites.com encourage you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thanks for watching Gunwebsites.com.